today we start off with one of the most exciting topics in the crypto asset industry, which is
Dogecoin.
Dogecoin. Absolutely. But I think before we jump into Dogecoin, we should really take it back and start from the early beginnings. Maybe let's start even with the history of memes. Max, where are memes actually coming from?
Well, I would put it quite simply. I think memes are the internet's native language. They compress complex emotions into viral images that spread culture, humor, and even critique at lightning speed. And I think, unlike traditional media, which we've all, become very used to, they don't require permission, they don't require a budget, and there are no gatekeepers. They're really grassroots, remixable, and they're essentially made to be viral. And the term meme was originally coined by a biologist, believe it or not, Richard Dawkins, and he actually used it to describe how ideas, much like genes, can spread really quickly, like wildfire. But it wasn't really until the rise of social media, where these on internet forums like 4chan, Reddit, Twitter. I remember even in school 9gag, that these memes really became the main form of expressing yourself online.
And
And
and I love that. Again, we had to look that up ourselves. As he mentioned, Richard Dawkins. He mentioned the term meme in a book called The Selfish Gene from 1976. And he calls memes a unit of culture. So again, just like music, ideas, catchphrases, clothes, fashion, but I absolutely love that because again, that is kind of like pre-internet times where we already have that word and a meaning of memes,
mhm,
and that is just the beginning of what leads to what we're going to talk about.
yeah, and I mean, one thing that's important to remember is, like, you know, they have now really evolved from really just funny posts into, I would say, cultural artifacts. Actually, they're easily recognizable, and over time they've even become influential in, somewhat influencing elections, shaping the trends that we see in the real world, and even creating celebrities. So I think it was also just a matter of time before this, these ideas of memes really turned from just pixels into tokens, and in that way turning culture actually into capital.
That's very good. But before we jump into that, let me ask, what were some of the first memes that you remember?
I I always remember one thing that I always, when I was back in school, it was the way me and my friends would also communicate and share ideas with each other. My favorite one is the troll face. I remember that being quite a staple of my middle school, being used to, get a quick laugh, a quick wit out of people, and there were many more, and these were usually kind of in comic style, I would say, but there were also just standalone pictures like the Velociraptor, the overly attached girlfriend, all of these, which really shaped how I actually viewed the internet back in the day.
Yeah, I remember that the beginnings, those pictures, those memes were all over 4chan or 9gag, Reddit, and yeah, it was the overly attached girlfriend, the little baby with the fist. I forgot the
Yeah,
name, and a
yeah,
lot of memes like that. But they definitely evolved. You could clearly see how memes evolved over time, and yeah, especially with the rise of social media, they became some sort of influential as well. And you alluded to that earlier, where you said they started to, yeah, also influence maybe even elections or, yeah, how we certain narratives on the internet.
yeah. And I think, what's also important to remember is that, we are moving more and more to the digital era, and community becomes even more important, I would argue, in the digital era. A place where you can feel belonging, a place where people have a like-minded ethos, maybe, or a similar approach to thinking and to humor, and that's very important. Community has always been a staple in the real world, and traditionally we would spend time together by going to the cinema, going to a park, having a meal together. And I'm not necessarily saying that memes are replacing those things, not at all, but they are definitely a form of it in the digital world. You can share these ideas online. You can talk about topics without actually having to write about them. And the more and more I think that we go into the internet era or into the next phase of the internet, the more I think, memes will actually still be extremely relevant, if not gain in relevance over time. And
To,
yeah,
I totally agree with you. As you said, online communities become more and more important. I know that might be a bit hard to imagine for older generations because it is a new thing. But if you think about it, a lot of the younger generations, they have their friends online. You meet people with that have the same interests. You meet up your peers that share the same kind of like ethics, thoughts, ideas. And a lot of times it is the communication through memes as well. And certain memes kind of like build the foundation of certain communities. I know one example that a lot of times, especially from traditional finance, is looked down upon is the GameStop saga.
hmm,
But for me, the GameStop saga really is the perfect example on how powerful communities actually are. Because again, it started really grassroots, really small, but at one point this community became so big, they all shared the same idea that they kind of want to fight against Wall Street and against these hedge funds. And just the power of a lot of single individuals coming together via the internet, building this community and succeeding at that point is just absolutely fascinating. And of course, a completely new concept in the modern age.
yeah, completely agreed. Right? They try to come together, to essentially try to beat the traditional players at their own game, and they were proven to be quite powerful in that as well. Um, and now I think we're entering the next phase or the next era of meme assets, if you will, and for all the crypto industry's innovation and just how much they're essentially reinventing the internet and finance altogether, the crypto industry still remains largely driven by narratives. And as we said, in the internet era, memes are among the most potent vehicles for this. They deliver humor, community, culture, all at lightning speed. And as a result, I think that's why we've seen them, garner a lot of attention, particularly, amongst more retail individuals or perhaps people who are of younger generations. And while that at first glance may not seem important, I think it is, because they don't necessarily try to reinvent financial infrastructure, but they operate on completely different fundamentals, and they distill this internet community, this culture, the nostalgia, the collective feeling and sentiment of people into a tradable asset. And no, they don't necessarily promise utility, but instead they derive value by monetizing relevance, I think, and monetizing memes altogether. And for me, I think that's quite important, because historically, if you look at the traditional social media platforms that we all know and use and love, of course, like Instagram, Twitter, Reddit, all of these, the upside, the economic upside of viral internet moments, or really internet defining moments, were flowed to the platforms themselves. They didn't go to the people who created it, who shared it, and who really built it from the ground up. And I think meme coins, they're starting to reverse that dynamic, or they're at least trying to, for a lot of them.
I mean, 100% agree with you. It is a new concept where a lot of people need to wrap their head around. But as you alluded to it, what I love about meme coins is that they force us to rethink of valuation. So obviously, they're not necessarily built on cash flows or utility, but they're built on culture, on community, and internet relevance. And in my opinion, we got to ask ourselves the question, do those things have value? And I would argue they do. Even in the real world, we like to hang around with our friends, with our family, share a traditional meal. This is all built on culture and traditions. And now we just have a tokenized digital version of that, which serves as a foundation of that value creation.
Yeah, completely agreed. I like to liken it to, think of your favorite YouTuber back in the day. Imagine you were to be able to subscribe to them and also gain a piece of that pie. Of course, the YouTubers themselves hopefully would be making a bigger piece of the pie from the platform, that they're posting on. But it would be great if you could actually, be participating not only by, sharing likes, comments, posting, reposting, but actually by gaining value from it as well. And I think the more and more we move, it really reflects actually the internet's move towards what we like to call, a participatory culture, where the lines between a creator, a consumer, and an investor altogether really become quite blurred. And that is actually the fundamental, value of it, that they um, are built on visibility, they're built on momentum and cultural traction.
100%. That's why I always argued. I mean, tokenization is a massive, massive buzzword and hype on Wall Street, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's talking about tokenization. What does it actually mean? And what are some of the early beginnings? Tokenization basically means to take anything that holds value, could be traditional assets or other things, and bring it on top of the blockchain, right?
Mm-hmm.
The case I want to make is I argue, and I did this, which is an opposing view and maybe a bit controversial, but I do think memes are one of the first bigger use cases of tokenization. Because again, we are tokenizing internet based communities,
Mm-hmm.
we are tokenizing viral moments on the internet, we're tokenizing social resonance and digital culture. But I think now it's getting a bit more complicated because there's so many meme coins, and maybe we have to talk about this as well a bit.
Yeah.
Are there different type of meme coins? Are they all the same thing? Because I would argue it's very similar to what we have with traditional crypto assets or with the crypto asset space in general. Not all crypto assets are the same, right? I know it's still a misconception out there where we think it's just some sort of digital money that is trying to replace the dollar or the Swiss francs. But I think now a lot of people came to the understanding that even within cryptocurrencies or crypto assets, there's different types, right? We have Bitcoin, for instance. The value proposition is more of a digital gold. We have something like Ethereum or Solana that are based on the same underlying technology, but they serve a completely different purpose. They're more of a platform for innovation
Mm-hmm.
or like a global app store.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be similar with meme coins, I would say. What's your opinion on that?
100%. I really think so, and I think part of the reason why we've seen them, or why they can be considered to be different, is because, as we've said, they're very grassroots, they're very approachable, and they're easy to create by design. And so as a result, not every one of them is actually created equal. In theory, yes, they try to capitalize on viral moments or internet specific, culture. But because of this, you also have some meme coins, as we've seen throughout, the end of 2024 and the beginning of 2025, that some of them, they are a bit extractive. They do, tend to siphon liquidity away from retail users and in the end, dump on them. And not, but it's clear to distinguish that not all of them are like this. A lot of these, fade away as soon as the moment passes. And that's why it's super important, I think, to really have a community and a like a long-standing community and culture about it. And I think that we've seen that with a couple of assets, crypto assets over time as well. You have the likes of Shiba Inu, you have the likes of Pepe, you have the likes of Floki. They've shown that over time, that the that they've shown the power of the meme driven movement over time as well. Yes, altogether some of them burn and they vanish, and others, they do turn into lasting ecosystems, and they all do run on the principal theory that attention is capital, and I think we do see that more and more in the digital era. But I think there is one of them which is, of course, the topic of today. One of them that stands completely apart and that predated all this hype, and evolved into something I would say far greater than just a meme or just a joke, and that would be Dogecoin.
No, 100%. Yeah, I remember some of those, as you said, some of those meme coins that came up during the presidential election. Very
Yeah,
short-lived,
exactly.
just based on a kind of like a viral moment.
Hmm.
Some maybe even news pieces. We all remember Geo Bowden or Peanut or meme coins like that. But if we look at the market cap, most of them actually died off.
Yeah.
And there are only a few as of now that really captured the longevity and remained in the top 10, top 20 for many, many years and cycles. So let's talk about Doge, because obviously Dogecoin is the OG meme coin. Again, it's something great, in our opinion, far greater than just a joke. It grew into kind of like its own brand,
Hmm.
its own culture, and therefore we really need to unpack it. How did Dogecoin start? Where does it come from?
I mean, even its origins, I would say, were a joke by the people who created them. It started in 2013 by a couple of engineers, Billy Marcus and Jackson Palmer, and they actually started it as a parody of the crypto space. To be clear, just as Bitcoin was really gaining traction in its first bull run, I would say. But importantly, it's built on its own blockchain. It was forked from Litecoin, and again, it features the Shiba Inu mascot, which was a staple of the early internet era, and it has the Comic Sans font, the infamous Comic Sans font. But it has no white paper, no VC backing, and altogether, I think it really embodied that internet native absurdity at its purest form. And I think the joke actually didn't last very long, because the Dogecoin website, in just a short month, actually had garnered over 1 million users or visitors. So the coin really quickly turned and caught the internet's attention. And it became kind of the unofficial tipping currency for platforms like Reddit and Twitter, and it's really started to catch attention for content creators or for using it as goodwill. So what really began as a satire joke actually, started to gain real traction, and this was all powered by the community behind it.
What I love about Dogecoin is, as you said, it's very pure. So for some of our listeners out there, we have to remember Dogecoin runs on a proof of
Yeah,
work network.
yeah,
So it runs on proof of work, which is obviously very similar to Bitcoin. That being said, it's actually very, very decentralized. Also, what I love, and you mentioned that, is just no VC backing.
hmm,
And I think this is something that, especially as of today, is a big problem in the crypto space.
yeah,
A lot of new projects, it might be layer ones, layer twos, or new applications, they're heavily VC backed. And we've seen this over and over again. When it comes to a bigger token unlock, they just dump on retail.
Yep.
And this can't really happen with some pure meme coin or social token like Doge. It's from the very beginning very fair, very transparent. The distribution is actually very distributed,
Yeah.
and therefore, I think it's much more. It's much better
I, I
and
yeah.
transparent.
I think so as well. And actually, I think, to just reiterate, or the way that, Dogecoin actually, as we mentioned, runs on a proof of work blockchain, which means, you have to mine Dogecoin. There was no, how we see with tokens nowadays, where there's an unlock that goes on and there's a cliff and all of this. And in the end, for retail investors, that's a little bit daunting, or at times even difficult to understand. And I think Dogecoin, once again, even in its technological build, I think has that kind of community first, or really consumer kind of first approach. Um, Instead of being built on the SHA-256 algorithm like Bitcoin is, it uses a script mining algorithm, which is far less resource intensive. And as a result, miners can really use consumer grade hardware to actually mine Dogecoin. And so when we look at, the Dogecoin like mining power distribution, it's also fairly decentralized, as we mentioned. I think it even competes with Bitcoin, and there's a lot of small miners which do, if you sum their parts all together, actually make up quite a bulk of the network. And altogether, their technological build is built for consumers. It's 10 times faster to use than it is to use Bitcoin. So transactions are confirmed every minute. And the fees on the blockchain itself are also quite relatively cheap. We're not saying that they're competing to be, a next generation global settlement layer, potentially like Solana or Ethereum, if you're thinking along those lines. But it can be used for something like micro tipping, or really, I would say, consumer to business, like transactions, as it's starting to get even more approved as a potential for payments. One thing, though, that I think sometimes people are a little bit worried about is with regards to having no maximum supply. I think, one thing to note is that while in theory it has no maximum supply, it is still very predictable and transparent. So there's 10,000 Doge that's mined every minute, and that as a result, you can, you know, estimate how many Doge will be in circulation at each year. And so as a result, because it's predictable, because it's consistent, over time, the inflation rate is actually disinflationary. And this is something that we can't say for, traditional other crypto assets, or even with, traditional currencies that we see nowadays. So in terms of fairness and community approach, it's even within the way that Dogecoin is actually built.
I would say Dogecoin is definitely a commodity, or I would say Dogecoin is definitely not a security. It
Yeah.
really is an internet-based commodity. All kind of the attributes and features that you just mentioned clearly speak to me that this should be considered an internet-based commodity.
Yeah. I mean, even the SEC recently actually labeled meme coins as not being securities, and now we're not grouping Dogecoin with the others, but again, is a nod to the fact that Dogecoin, is increasingly being recognized as an actual legitimate asset.
Now, what is it? What are some of the utility? I think Dogecoin, obviously, from its fundamental value, is based on community.
Yeah.
But there are some actually utility cases. Dogecoin is being used. What are some of those?
Well, again, I mentioned in terms of technology. It's fairly cheap to use. It's fairly cheap to transact with, and so as a result, we've started to see it become used as a payment tool. So we're actually there's a few companies that like the Dallas Mavericks, which is the NBA team based in Texas. They accept Dogecoin for merchandising, for tickets. Even the likes of Tesla, they accept it for not for their car purchases, but for again other parts. And you also have now not only direct integrations with businesses themselves, but also with crypto payment processors like BitPay, which expand the utility of Dogecoin in the real world. And I think this is actually only growing because while it didn't launch, with a formal roadmap or anything like this, the community, together have actually started to build what they actually call it, I think, a trail map. But they've started to build different features to make it even more useful. So one of my favorite initiatives that they have is what is called Radio Doge. And so Radio Doge, in its essence, makes Dogecoin it makes it so that you can transact with Dogecoin in more remote areas or offline areas by using, Starlink satellites. And that, I think, is another nod to the fact that it is aiming to be a really inclusive asset, and that the community together wants to be able to bring this to the wider world as well. And that embodies the community that, has a motto of, doing only good every day. And we've seen a number of, I think, initiatives of social good that they've done as well. What they've also done by being powered by their community, actually, the community is quite cultured. They were in 2014. If you've seen the movie Cool Runnings, they were actually inspired by them, and they raised 30,000 to send the Jamaican Olympic team, the Jamaican bobsled team, to the Olympics, to the Winter Olympics. They also crowdfunded around 55,000 for Josh Wise, I believe, to sponsor a NASCAR race at the Talladega racetrack. But it's not only small moments like this, but they've also even done and become more impactful over time. They launched the Doge for Water campaign, which raises funds to build clean water wells in Kenya. And actually, they were one of the only crypto assets. Of course, Bitcoin as well was accepted, but they were one of the only crypto assets that were formally accepted by the Ukrainian government when the conflict in Eastern Europe had begun. So that's also a nod to the growing influence that Doge has over time, and that its reach, is only expanding. It's now valued at nearly $30 billion, and yeah, it's a cultural asset with remarkable staying power.
Now let's talk about Dogecoin as a financial asset. Is it actually something that we can allocate to? I think it takes some time until people really realize what the value and kind of like this new narrative is behind cultural tokens or social tokens. But how does it actually fit into a portfolio?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, I think, when investors build their portfolio is, of course, they're looking for assets that deliver asymmetric returns to what they already have. And I like to say that Dogecoin is really off its leash. It moves to its own rhythm, and this is present in the traditional space, but also within the crypto space as well. The analysis that we did actually showed that it has an approximate 15% correlation on a 2-week rolling basis. And this is even smaller for the traditional assets that we were talking about. Even in the crypto space, we've seen that it has around a near 30% correlation with the blue chips. And that's because, in the crypto space, we have this dynamic of capital flows that we typically see, where after blue chip assets, rally, we typically see the higher beta ones come into the fray. So something like Dogecoin. So for an investor, from a correlation perspective, I would say that Dogecoin is really detached from the rest of your portfolio, and so it may provide, while being potentially unconventional, may provide something with true diversification potential.
And I think we have to emphasize that, right? Because it not only has a low correlation to traditional assets, saying US equities, for instance, fixed income, gold, but also Bitcoin and Ethereum. Because as you just mentioned, we do have this capital rotation within the crypto space. We also know sometimes there's some narrative driven cycles which include meme coins, and therefore Doge, just looking historically speaking, does have a low correlation also to crypto assets, which is obviously fascinating and therefore already sets the stage and foundation for a potential portfolio inclusion.